Thank you so much, attendees, for dialing into our first official session of the day, how the EUDR is reshaping business strategies and commodity standards. We're, of course, really excited to talk to you all out about the EU Deforestation Regulation. This is a major topic of conversation for those of you who are doing business within the European Union, whether you're importing, whether you're exporting, whether you're selling domestically within the European Union. This is a really transformative piece of legislation that will, fundamentally change business strategy, sourcing standards, and standards for commodities. So a lot to dive into today. As a reminder, before I introduce our wonderful panelists, for our attendees, you should see at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there is a Q&A function. There's a little question mark and a button that says Q&A underneath. If you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to drop those questions into the Q&A function. You can ask questions anonymously. And at the end of the session, time permitting, we will raise some of those questions in the panel. So we're going to get started here. I know we are waiting on Floriane, but I will just kick things off and introduce our panelists. So I'm joined here by Christian Sloth, the Director of Sustainability Programs at Preferred by Nature. I'm very excited to chat with you today, Christian. And we are also joined by Floriane Hédé, the Traceability Manager for Responsible Sourcing at Ferrero. Again, really, really looking forward to the conversation. Christian, I'm going to start with you here. We recently learned that the EU Deforestation Regulation may be delayed by 12 months, meaning it would go into effect December 30th, 2025. Any initial thoughts or reactions to this delay? Do you feel the delay was justified? Do you have any concerns about how the regulation will be enforced should this 12-month delay go into effect?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I mean, I think it was kind of maybe a good compromise to have the delay for the political process to maybe limit the opposition to the regulation itself. There was a lot of, there's been some opposition to some of the aspects of the regulation itself. So I think the delay was kind of a compromise that would allow the current language of the regulation to pass through, but then at the same time give some more time to the industry to align and get ready for the regulation. So I actually don't see it as a negative necessarily. Also seen from the experience we had with the EU timber regulation, which was similar regulation just only for timber and for legality. It was implemented, and it was very clear that neither the competent authorities or the industry were ready when it was actually put into force and started to be implemented. So it took a long time before the authorities as well as the industry were able to actually meet the requirements in the first place. So it may actually be a good thing, but yeah. Not that I'm not saying that it's good to delay action on deforestation and legality, but if we want the industry to comply or align with the requirements, then yeah, maybe it's a good compromise.
Absolutely. And you segued expertly to my next question. I know Preferred by Nature has a lot of experience with the timber regulation, the predecessor to the deforestation regulation. But for a lot of the commodities that are in scope for EUDR, because they were not exposed to the EUTR, they maybe don't know what some of the challenges and perhaps learnings from the implementation and enforcement of the timber regulation might be. So, can you share any issues, best practices, challenges that your team might have seen around the EUTR implementation and enforcement? And what do you sort of hope the EU will get right this time around with the deforestation regulation?
Um, how long do you have? Yeah, where do I start? Um, from if we start with the enforcement perspective, I think that the experiences from the EU timber regulation have clearly informed the development of the system for enforcement of the EU deforestation regulation. I mean, there was some challenges with lack of alignment between the national competent authorities in interpreting the regulations requirements in the different member states. Uh, Plus, there was no way for the different member states to um, what do you say to gain information about imports in other countries, in third countries inside the EU, which led to the establishment of strawman companies that were used to import timber that had not fulfilled the requirements, but then were placed on the market. And another aspect that is now dealt with is aligned with or related to that is that it's not only the first placement of the product that is regulated, or it is not only the first placer of a product on the market that is regulated. The legal requirements also are applicable downstream in the supply chain and at the point of export from the EU market, which means that the liability and the responsibility for due diligence is you cannot avoid it by just using a strawman company. And then so the fact that EU is implementing this information database where they will collect customs data or be based on customs data and the trace database, and the fact that the legal liability is implemented downstream in the supply chain, to me are very key legal instruments that they have learned from the EU timber regulation. Yeah, just for the industry, of course, it's difficult to say because it's so varied. What some companies have been working with timber supply chain management, legality issues, sustainability issues for many years. Others have not, and have very little experience and knowledge in these fields. It may be for different reasons. It may be that the products that are covered are only minor parts of a supply chain, for example, if it's component products. Um, but in terms of the implementation in a company, like I would say, just to keep this short, like one key message is that the actions and the decisions to implement the activities to align with the regulations should be taken at executive level and really implemented by staff that have what do you say, that not only competence but also the power in the company and the resources. I mean, that one thing we have seen is that the supply chain management aspects have been placed on the people who were buying or selling, maybe that didn't really have the expertise to look at sustainability or legality issues, did not have the resources to actually meet these requirements. So from a company perspective, it's really important that the resources are set aside and the executive power is behind those solutions and decisions. I'm going to stop here. I mean, there's a lot of other things, of course, but
Very, very helpful overview. I think that there's, as you said, so much to say around, arguably what didn't work with the timber regulation, but also a point that I just want to, call out that you mentioned that I think is really, really critical is it's imperative that companies have folks who have the power to sort of make change within their organization really prioritize compliance with EUDR because should this 12-month delay move forward, what we really expect is not just will this 12 months be an opportunity for companies to ensure that they're compliant, it's also an opportunity for competent authorities to ensure that they have the mechanisms, the processes in place to enforce the regulation to the fullest extent of the law. So companies that are looking to comply, should not be using this 12 months as, okay, now we've got a break and we can sort of sit back and wait for a year. We really should expect this to mean that enforcement won't be, lax and that it will be very strict because they have the opportunity to ensure that it is. So,
Yeah.
so
Just a
really
comment on that. Yeah, I think that's correct. I also think that the competent authorities have learned a lot from the EU timber regulation. You know, when that started back in 2013, the competent authorities hardly knew what the concept due diligence and risk-based approach to supply chain management was. But they do now in most countries, and most of the people I've talked to are quite aware of what is required and what it is about. So I think the level of understanding is also changing at the national competent.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, Floriane, I'd love to turn to you. Of course, Ferrero really has been an industry leader around responsible sourcing for many years now, long before, the deforestation regulation was a priority for the EU. I would love for you to share with us a little bit about how Ferrero has approached responsible sourcing before EUDR and sort of what's evolved since the regulation passed over the last couple of years.
Yes, absolutely. So you're right. This notion of responsible sourcing has been implemented already years ago in Ferrero. We have actually a team that is dedicated on this topic for several years as well. The types of topic that we deal with within this team, that is part of procurement, are, for example, due diligence, traceability topics, and then we have other levels like the follow-up of the standards and certification, and then the implementation of programs with a positive social or environmental impacts. So these are the different aspects that we deal with in this organization of the responsible sourcing team. And then in terms of organization, this has been, of course, a great support for the preparation for EUDR implementation. Like I was mentioning, due diligence and traceability topics, which are key according to the regulation, are key topics that we are dealing with for several years now.
Absolutely. And Florian, we were speaking about sort of at the beginning of this webinar, we were speaking about the delay and sort of how companies are approaching the prospect of the deforestation regulation being delayed by an additional 12 months. With all of the work that Ferrero has already done to ensure that it is responsibly sourcing and meeting the requirements of the law. How are you approaching the prospect of a delay? Sort of what are some things that you can share around how the company is putting those processes in place to ensure that you're fully taking advantage of these 12 months?
Yes, so on this question, it's true that at the moment we wait until the final confirmation that it's postponed. So
Of course.
at the moment we keep the same speed in our process to anticipate potentially to get compliant by the end of this year anyway. But it's true that we have also anticipated this alternative approach to have a delay, and we have a bit adapted our schedule in case this is indeed confirmed that the date of application is postponed. So, for example, the way we are going to use this additional time would be to eventually optimize the transfer of data, because the way we want to implement the verification of non-deforestation, for example, is involving key stakeholders, Sourcemap being part of it, but also additional service providers. We are working here with Starlink platform to perform satellite monitoring verification on top of crossing layers of information from EU. And here it will be beneficial to have additional time to optimize the transfer of data and to also leverage on the next APIs to come. Because at the moment we are performing all the tests in a manual way, but for sure it's learning by doing. We will see also how the APIs and all the processes that we can automatize will work in the future. And yeah, with this experience of testing, we will see, and this time could be beneficial for this reason.
Absolutely. Christian, I want to turn back to you here. Preferred by Nature, of course, has a long history of working with companies to help identify some of those compliance gaps and areas in which companies, should and can prioritize. I noticed that Preferred by Nature recently published a blog post really urging companies to stay the course despite the prospect of an EUDR postponement. How are you as an organization approaching the delay, and how might this impact how you're advising some of the companies that you work with on how to proceed?
I think we have kind of aligned with what Floriane said, that, we're kind of waiting for confirmation, and otherwise we keep on doing what we believe is the right way to go, and it's, preparing for the regulation, but also supporting and our clients to get ready for the regulation. So yeah, it doesn't really change anything for us really, other than there is more time for our clients to get ready, which could be seen as a good thing, of course. But at least there is a higher likelihood that when the regulation is then enforced, that the companies will actually be where they should be. So I mean, we're not really doing that much different, to be honest. We'll continue our work. Yeah.
Absolutely. And of course, we're still waiting on that official vote. I believe the date on the official register for the vote is November 6th. So we're a few days away. But absolutely, I think important that both of you have reiterated here, until the vote has actually gone forward, we're still looking at a December 30th, 2024 enforcement deadline. And so in both cases, either whether the regulation enters into force at its original date, or if companies have an additional 12 months, this is a really critical period for companies to ensure that they're compliant. And so they should not be, sitting back and waiting for, the official next steps. This is really critical in either scenario. We are still waiting on the EU to publish its country benchmarking system. They've published the implementation guidance, and they've published a now third iteration of their FAQs recently. But Christian, I know Preferred by Nature has done extensive research on country-specific requirements, particularly around EUTR. There are a lot of really, really helpful materials on Preferred by Nature's website for our attendees who have not had a chance to look at those. A lot of really great research there. Do you plan on replicating such research for the primary producing countries for EUDR commodities? And is there anything you can share about sort of what that research process looks like?
Yeah, thanks for that. That's yeah, that's some of what I'm working with. It's yeah, we call it risk assessments or national risk assessments. I know that the EU is, they are doing these country benchmarks, which, as far as I know, will mostly be based on FAO deforestation and forest land cover change statistics, which is self-reporting, by the way, by countries. So there are some things there, but yeah, I mean, so we are still working on developing plans at national level and commodity-specific risk assessments. We have worked in the past both with publicly funded money and together with FSC and other organizations to develop and publish risk assessment, both for timber and legality, but also for other commodities like palm oil and soy. for broader sustainability issues on what we call our sourcing hub. And we are continuing that work at the moment. It is a very labor-intensive process and data-intensive to conduct these risk assessments, so it's quite a lot of work. So we are currently, without funding, we are working on some risk assessments where we see a need that our clients have. We are doing it, on our own time, if you want. So we do not have like a major project right now where we develop many risk assessments. We're looking into also working through what we call Risk Information Alliance with other certification organizations, for example, the FSC, to establish a common risk assessment framework. So all these organizations that work with these commodities that are relevant go together and create risk assessments together and use each other's information. Yeah, so there's a lot of activity going on there because one thing about just one final point on the EU country benchmarks is that they only focus on deforestation. As far as I know, they are not evaluating the legality aspect, which is still a requirement. So I would say there are some questions mark on how that is interpreted right now. It's like if a country have a low risk score on the deforestation from the EU, will you not also be required to evaluate legality risks, which may not necessarily be linked to deforestation risks?
Absolutely. And something that I always find really important to reiterate to companies is, of course, the EU, the information coming from the Commission is important for us to all internalize, evaluate, make sure that we are following the requirements that the Commission has outlined. But we can't expect that every single answer is addressed either in the implementation guidelines, the FAQs, or the country benchmarking system. Inevitably, there will be some areas of the law that have some degree of ambiguity, some degree of opacity. So I think it really is important that, particularly around the legality component that you just described, that companies are thinking through how do we want to address this? How do we want to approach this? How do we actually conduct a robust risk assessment that addresses some of the key areas that the Commission has pointed to as critical to look at for legality? Of course, in the recent implementation guidelines, and excuse me, FAQs, there were some questions published by the Commission around, these are some questions that companies should be asking as they're assessing their suppliers for compliance. But every single outstanding question just will not be answered before the regulation enters into effect. And so we can't rely on, the publication of the benchmarking system to say, the Commission has factored in every single risk area outside of just deforestation risk, but also legality, and CPI and all of these other ways to determine country-specific risk. So really important points there. I want to ask a follow-up question just around country benchmarking, frankly. So, we all know that not every non-EU country is thrilled about how the deforestation regulation may impact their exports. Do you foresee, Christian, any major hurdles as companies that are reliant on these countries to produce EUDR commodities try to comply with the law? I understand this is sort of a speculative question, but how are you thinking that through?
Yeah, it's very difficult to answer, I think, but no, yeah, I don't really know, to be honest. I mean, it it seems to be very different how different countries have perceived the regulation. And of course, there's a lot of nervousness in exporting countries due to, you can to interpretation maybe of the requirements and what it will mean. So of course there is a risk that exports can be hindered or uh, slowed down in the beginning. But I think also with, yeah, exactly with the delay, that it should be possible to ensure that it won't be a problem by the time it's actually enforced. So yeah, I cannot really answer in more detail, I think. I don't know.
Of course, I mean it is highly speculative. I think that um, you know, a lot of the EU is reliant on a handful of non-EU countries as suppliers, as major suppliers of some of the key EUDR commodities. So it's an interesting challenge and one that, we'll see what this actually looks like once the deforestation regulation enters into force. But I know this has been a major topic of conversation, both within the EU and out of the EU. So wanted to hear, sort of your initial thoughts on that. Um, Floriane, back to you. As we've discussed, obviously Ferrero has this long history of mapping its supply chains. What are some key challenges that you've faced over the years on either collecting data from your suppliers or sort of conducting those risk assessments, or even prioritizing, where do you want to start with the massive, very extensive supply chains that Ferrero has, given its number of products? Can you share any challenges or even best practices that you've learned over the years?
Yes, so to come first on your question about prioritization, it's true that we started first with the ingredients that are key for Ferrero in terms of volumes. So we started this exercise and efforts on traceability for our key ingredients, meaning, for example, hazelnut that we use in our products, for the dairy, for cocoa, for palm oil. In that sense, we prioritize according to, yes, in terms of volumes, the major ingredients. We had to, of course, adapt a bit the prioritization according to the EUDR, because we have also now in our target coffee, where we use really small volumes of coffee, but they are indeed part of the regulation. So we need to close this gap. And we have already initiated last year data collection for traceability on coffee, just to be able to also match the requirements of EUDR for this commodity too. Then regarding your question about what are the limits or the challenges regarding traceability, for sure there are. It depends, I would say, on the ingredients. I have in mind, for example, the data confidentiality that we have to take care of. That's why also we rely on partners like Sourcemap to also frame this question like an external party that has all the approval and certificates to perform it properly. Sometimes there are also some suppliers that are afraid to be bypassed if they share the information of the next supplier in the supply chain, the upstream suppliers. So here, I think it's a matter of providing confidence to the supplier that there won't be any changes in the business that we are performing with them and with the other suppliers. So kind of commitments from the Ferrero side that even if we have traceability information, it won't change the organization in terms of the supply chain. And there are also some tools that we can leverage on, because in our supplier code, which is, by the way, a public document that is possible to find on internet, this is yes, the supplier code is a kind of agreement, pre-agreement before working with the suppliers on key topics, and traceability is part of it. So it means that the supplier are informed that we have ambition and commitment regarding traceability. So to have the business with us, they have to agree to share the information. So this is something that we can use as a tool to facilitate this effort of traceability, and something that is also coming to my mind just to deal with this notion of fear from the supplier to share the information. I must say that we are also spending quite a lot of time with the suppliers to clarify our ambition and to also clarify the commitments that we have, so that they can feel more the reason why we're working on it. It's not really to to for bad reasons in a way that we are working on this topic, but really for good reasons. And I think this effort of education is also quite well supporting the approach overall.
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned something really, really important that I want to underline, and that is around establishing that trust with your suppliers. We saw this with companies that were importing into the United States under the a U.S. forced labor regulation, a fear that from suppliers, an understandable fear, but a fear that they were going to lose their contracts with some of the companies that were using their services and using their commodities, using their products, because if they didn't have the correct evidentiary documentation to prove compliance, if there was anything that they were nervous about sharing with the companies that they worked with, they were perhaps reluctant to do so due to the fear that they would lose those contracts and lose that business. That is, it sort of comes with the territory with, complying with the deforestation regulation. There will be suppliers that are just non-compliant, and that's something that I think everyone is aware of. But a best practice that we're oftentimes reiterating from SourceMap side is for compliance with any regulation, and even outside of that, just data collection from suppliers. It is really important to establish that trust and establish that precedent of why are we asking for this information? Because without that, it can be difficult to get suppliers to provide the information that you're requesting. They may be, nervous, they may be suspicious, and as I said, understandably so. So that establishment of trust and establishing those really solid relationships with your upstream suppliers, I think, is something that Ferrero does so well, but it really is a best practice for other companies.
Yes, and if I may add, I think having this regulation in application will also support this because it will be by law that it will be important to share the traceability information. So in the end, it would, I assume, facilitate the process for us and support our commitments even more.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Christian, I want to just circle back to again some of the great research that Preferred by Nature has done. Um, Do you feel that there are any commodities that are in scope for EUDR that are perhaps further ahead in terms of preparing for the regulation, either because they have that established precedent of data collection as a requirement, or for other reasons because responsible sourcing has really been a priority for companies that are sourcing those commodities? What can you share around how the EUDR commodities are in terms of sort of that level playing field as we approach the enforcement deadline?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, um, of course, there are several factors affect that. One is like the types of supply chains that normally used for the different commodities, of course, affect the ability of supply chain transparency, and especially the geolocation information transfer in the supply chain. So the traditional structures of the supply chain, I think, have a huge impact on that. Of course, for timber, it's something that has been under the EU timber regulation for the last 10 years, 11 years. So there is a level of understanding in the industry uh, on how to apply a due diligence or risk-based approach to sourcing. So you could say that the timber sector have a little bit uh, yeah, of a jump start on the regulation. But that's not to say that there have been, there are also have been a lot of sustainability initiatives in in the other commodities. But from that perspective, you could say that timber is a little bit ahead. So the other factor is, as I mentioned in the beginning, the structure of the supply chain. So if you have supply chains with traditional like smallholder plantations, it can have its own challenges in relation to collection of geolocation data, but also in assessing risks of legal non-compliance and dealing with those issues where you have in commodities where you may have larger scale production, maybe like soy in some areas for soy production, at least, there may be some advantages there, even though the supply chain management may be more difficult for soy because it's mixed from different sources. It may be that some of the larger uh, soy producers, they can more easily provide the information and the legal assurance that is needed. So yeah, so there are different aspects that affects for the different commodities. I wouldn't say that one is have an easier time than the other, but as I said, the timber industry have some experience from the EUDR that has not been applied to the other commodities. So the industry there will know the concepts maybe a little bit better in some cases. But yeah.
Great. I think, again, if this delay proceeds, for some of those commodities that maybe don't have as extensive of a history of supply chain mapping, for example, cocoa and coffee and palm oil, these are commodities where this is, and timber, as you said, like this has been a precedent. Um, these 12 months provide an opportunity to execute that in practice and prepare. Something that SourceMap is advising the companies that we work with in these 12 months is to essentially utilize this as an opportunity to pre-screen your suppliers for compliance. So not just can your suppliers provide you with the polygons in the right format? We can screen them for deforestation for your suppliers that are consistent suppliers that you consistently work with before the regulation actually enters into force. But also with the legality aspect of the law, these 12 months can be a ample time to assess legality, due diligence, and then also to remediate any risks that you are identifying, or begin to at least remediate those risks that you're identifying before the regulation enters into force. So, as I've said, I think we've all sort of underscored this. Companies should be proceeding as planned and not, sitting back and waiting for this vote or for the next steps. But even assuming that the vote moves forward, which it is looking fairly likely that it will, these 12 months are an opportunity. They are not a break for companies to wait around for the next 12 months. I want to talk a little bit about the role of auditing, of those on-the-ground audits, spot checks. I'm sure you both kind of have unique perspectives on this, just given your roles within your respective companies. But Floriane, I want to start with you, just given Ferrero's, again, long history of responsible sourcing. Um, Either in your previous work before the EUDR was passed and went into effect, or looking forward, how do you sort of envision on-the-ground audits playing a role in EUDR compliance, either for Ferrero or just sort of in general for companies? And then, Christian, I'll raise the same question to you.
Yes, you're right. Regarding our organization, even before we talk about EUDR, we were performing some audits to check that indeed the information that the supplier declared were coherent with what we could observe on the field. So for that, we have again requested the support of external partners, auditing companies to support on these aspects. This is great on our side to be confident that the information that is collected is coherent and robust. In the future for EUDR, we want to implement also this kind of verifications in the field. This is part of a process that is being built at the moment that we speak, part of the due diligence activities. But yes, this is something that we want to implement on top of data collection.
Absolutely. Christian, would love to hear your thoughts on this as well, on how on-the-ground audits are part of EUDR compliance.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I mean, on ground auditing is used mainly as a risk mitigation measure, where there is a need for, if your risk assessments show that there are risks of, let's say, legal non-compliance with specific requirements that can only be verified by going there, like let's say the yeah. Like the use of health and safety regulations, for example, in farm or forest management. You will probably have to go if there are high risk area. You probably have to go to the field level to verify if the rules are being adhered to. But I think it does play a large role um, in cases where there are high risks, and that's also why why existing voluntary certification systems can play an important role because they do have on-site verification or audits of the people that are part of that the supply chain. So, but definitely it's something that we have as part of our both as something that we provide as a service, but also in our toolkits that we are developing. We describe how companies themselves can conduct their own audits and verify high risk aspects of suppliers.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on something really important there. When you're assessing your suppliers for legal compliance, in certain cases, there are, of course, sort of recommended evidentiary documents that you can collect that do prove or provide evidence at the very least that a supplier is compliant. But that does not exist for every single aspect of legality, either identified by the EU or other areas that you might be interested in as a business in ensuring that your suppliers are compliant. And so those are the areas where an on-the-ground audit may be recommended and may be a best practice because document collection doesn't necessarily check off every single box. So it's really something that companies should be really thinking about. For many, this is already part of their responsible sourcing and due diligence mechanisms. It's not like when the deforestation regulation passed, this was the first time that companies started thinking about due diligence in their upstream supply chain. Many do have a long history of doing so, and on-the-ground audits are oftentimes a part of that. So it's really an interesting aspect of and best practice, I would say, for companies where they do have particularly risky supply chains and particularly risky suppliers. I know that we are approaching at the end of the session. What I'd love to do, give both of you an opportunity to do is sort of leave our audience with some sort of concluding thoughts around deforestation regulation overall, sort of what you're prioritizing and how you're thinking about the delay. Leave everyone with a little bit of a soundbite here of what they should be doing, maybe a recommendation or your perspective there around what we do in these either next 2 months or next 12 months and a little bit of extra time. So Floriane, I'll hand it over to you to sort of leave us with some parting thoughts um, as we approach this vote and as we approach this deadline.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, as we said, I think we are, of course, waiting for the confirmation of the postponement of the date of application, if any. In the meantime, we are continuing with the same level of commitment, the preparation for EUDR compliance, as if it was to be implemented by the end of this year. I would like to also add that from the beginning, Ferrero has been supporting this regulation, and we are still supporting, we are still in favor of the implementation of this regulation because we are convinced that it's providing kind of a frame and way to proceed on traceability because this notion can be super vague. And here we have some clear guidance from the regulation on how to proceed. We also acknowledge that there are still some missing clarity or information on some of the aspects of the regulation, but I fully agree with what you said before. At some point, we will also have to, on our side, take some hypothesis or interpretation of the regulation to do as best as we can in the most honest way, if I can say it this way, the proper implementation of the regulation. But yeah, we think that if the regulation is indeed postponed, it will be the opportunity for the EU to provide the missing information. But we do not want to, we hope not to delay too much the implementation of these efforts because it's key to start. And as I was saying before, it's really learning by doing. And we count on the EU to provide the guidance in a really timely manner so that we can proceed in the fastest way. But anyway, our position is to support this regulation.
Thank you, Floriane. Christian, any parting thoughts from you?
Yeah, I mean, from like the industry perspective in both in Europe but also outside Europe, I guess it's like I think Florian also mentioned it, but it's about collaborating with suppliers and really establishing a relationship with suppliers because unless the products are part of an established certification system that provides the necessary assurance and information required that you can use in your due diligence system, then you cannot implement the due diligence on a non-certified supply chains unless you have a close relationship with your suppliers and that there's trust and openness. So, I mean, that's really a key thing. I think is to have that relationship with suppliers and supply chains so you can access information, you can be part of changing if there are risks that need to be verified or practices that need to be changed. If there are risks that are actually real in the supply chain, then it's all about relationship and transparency in supply chains. So yeah.
Excellent. Great parting thoughts from you both. I think you've left us with a lot to think about. It's been really great to hear your unique perspectives from Ferrero, from Preferred by Nature. Really a lot for us to contemplate. We're all urgently awaiting the outcome of this vote on November 6th. But as both of you have said and sort of reiterated across this panel, companies should be proceeding as planned and ensuring that their supply chains are compliant and that their products are compliant now. So this is not this is not a time to sort of be sitting back and waiting.